This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, and if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you've come to the right place, and you are going to love today's episode because we're talking with Samuel Blackman. He's the founder and head of R&D at One Biopharmaceuticals. Sam's an MD, PhD, has over 15 years of industry experience, and he was a practicing pediatric neuro-oncologist before coming to industry. And today, we're going to hear about his adventure, trekking to the base camp of Mount Everest, and the leadership insights that he gained from that life-changing experience. Sam Blackman, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Oh, thanks, Michael. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, the pleasure's mine, and I cannot wait to hear more about this trip to Mount Everest. But first, I'm curious, how did you even get the opportunity presented to you for this opportunity?
Well, I'm glad you asked because it gives me a chance to plug my friend and member of the biotech ecosystem, Luke Timmerman. So those of you who have read Luke's work on the Timmerman Report or follow him know that a number of years ago, he got involved in climbing. He's always been very athletic, got involved in climbing to raise money for the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center just down south of where I am in Seattle, and had started to put together these treks for biotech executives, really to do a number of things. One, importantly, to raise money for cancer research at Fred Hutch, but also to take people in the industry that he knows so well, put them together, and challenge them in all sorts of different ways. And he had asked me about joining a trek to Everest Base Camp a few years ago, and I, of course, was very tied up with trying to get day one up off the ground, so I had to say no, even though it's always been on my list of things to do. And then back in the end of 21, he said, I'm going to do this Everest trek now that COVID is starting to remit. Would you be interested in going? And I asked my wife and daughter what they thought, and asked my boss if it was okay. And they said that, I absolutely should do this because this is a good point. It was something that I really wanted to do at this point in my life to really test myself, because I think outside of work, we don't get a chance to really test ourselves physically like we might have done when we were younger. And I was looking for something that was going to completely reframe the perspective that I had on myself and the work that I do. So signed up for it and raised a bunch of money, almost $100,000 for Fred Hutch. The team as a whole raised over $1 million, $1.3 million, I think. And we did it, and it was incredible.
And how many people went with you?
There were 20 of us, including not including our guides and the Sherpas who helped us find our way.
Got it. Yeah, my family calls me the Sherpa when we go on vacation. I'm always carrying all the luggage.
A dad thing or a parent thing, sure.
Yeah. So you and a group of other biotech executives had to travel together, live in very close quarters, I'm assuming, for an extended period of time. We're just coming out of COVID. What did that experience teach you about leadership?
It was really interesting. So yes, we spent about 3 weeks together. Most of us didn't know each other at all and came from all sorts of different places at a variety of different levels, mostly very senior people. I think one of the first things that struck me over the first few days was the change in affect and sort of stance that we had to each other. I don't want to speak for obviously everybody. I can only speak for myself, but at this point in time, if you walk into a room with a group of strangers or people in your profession, you walk in wearing the veneer of who you are as a professional, right? I walk in and I'm Sam Blackman. I'm the founder and head of research and development at Day One. But obviously that's just the external sort of face that I'm wearing at that moment for that situation. But it's reflexive at this point. You go to ASCO or you go to JP Morgan or something like that, and that's the suit that you're wearing. Yeah. So there was a little bit of that, but what was really remarkable to me is how quickly all of that started to fall away. And we all started to share things about ourselves, our lives, beyond the professional. And then once we really got into it and we were really pushing ourselves, or we were having to overcome, physical, challenges, or just the sheer exhaustion of doing this, you started to really get to see people at a deeper and deeper level. I liken it to summer camp, where you take a group of strangers, and at least for me, when I was growing up, my parents sent us away for 8 weeks to the mountains, and it was a thing. And you'd have all these kids, and then in a relatively short period of time, all the stuff about your background and where you came from, that just vanishes. And then you just bond and everything about each other very, very quickly. We just don't get a chance to do that very much as adults, certainly not at this age. So stripping off that facade, not only being willing to show your authentic self, but really being vulnerable, because there are times when you're vulnerable. There are things that are frightening or scary or hard to do. You can't keep up with a group, and how do you process that? Being compassionate for people who may be feeling very, very poorly, or trying to support people who may not be pacing with you. Sometimes there were times, at least when we were really at altitude, and it was hard for me to do anything other than focus on my breathing, and trying to get people to understand that they might want to be chatty with you, and I'm just focusing on getting my lungs full of oxygen for the next few minutes, and trying to navigate, like, I'm just going to walk near you, and I'm not going to talk, and I'm not going to engage, because I'm in my head trying to put one foot in front of the other. But it was really that willingness to be vulnerable in front of people, I think, was the most important leadership lesson, because it was through that we were able to support each other and trust each other, and all accomplish the goal that we set out to do, both individually and as a team.
I love that. That's such great leadership advice. Strip off the facade, show your authentic self, and realize that we're all trying to survive in this thing, and we're all on the same team, ultimately.
And I have to say, the other thing that really helped a lot was to be self-effacing, and genuinely self-effacing. When you're with a group of people and your intestines are not behaving, right? You could be quietly embarrassed and dying inside, or you can just be like, let it all hang out, and that willingness to poke fun at ourselves, and that good humor, that really helps to that authenticity and vulnerability, coupled with humor, not taking yourself too seriously, really, really, I think, forged bonds between a lot of us in that group that really persist today and are strong. I know I could pick up the phone and call anybody that I was on that trip with, and chat with them, or meet up with them, and we just pick up where we left off.
Yeah, and knowing you, I could see you using humor in a very difficult situation. And there was another difficult situation that you kind of related to me, that you're terrified of heights.
I'm definitely afraid of heights, which makes the whole, like, going to Mount Everest Base Camp a little paradoxical.
Yeah, and I empathize with you. I get really scared of heights, not for myself, but for the other people that are near the edge or whatever.
Yeah.
But you learned a valuable lesson, a leadership lesson from facing your fears. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've always been really uncomfortable in exposed heights. I don't think I really appreciated it until I was probably in my late teens, early 20s. I went to Paris and tried to walk up the stairs at the Eiffel Tower, and I got to the second platform, and I was not going to go any higher. Like, I was literally clinging to some giant steel structure in the middle, because I don't know, you get up there and I have this irrational fear that either something's going to blow me over the edge, push me over the edge, or for some reason I'm going to have some involuntary muscle spasm that just flings me over the edge. And that's always been the case. Airplanes, fine. Cliffs, not so fine.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be big heights. I'm not crazy about getting up on a ladder. So, I knew that sort of trekking is not, you're not climbing to the top of Mount Everest. You're going up to about 18,000 feet, but you're on solid ground. What I didn't realize is that in order to get there, you're having to cross back and forth across these massive ravines where the water that melts off of the glaciers comes running down the side of the mountain. And you're crossing on these suspension bridges that are essentially made of wire. And they are very high up.
My stomach's dropping
And
just
they
thinking
swing
about
back and forth, and they go this way and they go this way. And the first time we got to one of those, I took one look and I'm like, well, that's a short trip for me. I'll catch the next plane back to Kathmandu. Thank you very much. But there was no way for me to get to where I was going without getting across many of these. And I was absolutely crystal clear with people that this was not my favorite thing, not at all. And so I had to figure out, like, how am I going to do this? And what I realized was that the only way that I was going to be able to do this was with help. And what I recognized was I could focus my mind, right? But I needed somebody or something to focus on. And my person, it was Jody Morrison, who is CEO of Q32. She and I just really clicked on this trip. And she was not crazy about the heights either. And I said, here's what we're going to do, Jody. You're going to walk in front of me, and you're just going to walk, and you're not going to stop. And I'm just going to focus on the top of your backpack. That's all I'm going to stare at, because I know that if I look to the left or I look to the right, or God forbid I look down, I'm just going to melt. And as long as you are walking and I am seeing you, I'm going to be okay. And we did many of these, and she would be ahead of me. She'd be like, "You okay back there, Sam?" And I'm like, "Keep walking, Jody. I'm doing great." And I just kept my eyes laser focused on her backpack, and it was her pulling me, right, that got me across these things without wanting to have a coronary. And at the end of the day, it makes you realize that we all have things that we're afraid of, right? We're complicated people. I don't know why I'm afraid of heights. It's not like I ever fell off from a large height or anything like that. It's just who I am. And so the first thing is accepting your fears and limitations. And the second is asking for help and finding people who are able to help you. And then not being afraid, right, to ask for that help and allowing yourself to be helped. And that, I think, translates into a lot of the things that we have to deal with professionally. There are things that all of us are terrified of: public speaking for some people, or taking risks, or making really hard decisions, or having hard conversations. At this level, the two things that I think are important to always remember, and I think that successful leaders remember, is even the best leaders, and probably the best leaders, know to ask for help and aren't ashamed or embarrassed to ask for help. Actually recognizing that you need help and asking for it is a sign of strength and never a sign of weakness.
Yeah, what beautiful lessons, not only about leadership, just about life. And I got to think there's sometimes we're the person with the backpack, we're the Jody, and Sam's behind us, and other times we're Sam following a Jody, and both of those are valuable lessons.
Absolutely. And especially when you're leading a group of people, understanding what their fears are and what their limitations are, and offering support in a way that's not embarrassing to them. You could imagine people who see that suspension bridge and be like, "Oh God, don't be a baby, like just walk, the bridge isn't going to fall down." Your rational brain is like, "It shouldn't fall down." Like, I watched yaks walk across these bridges, and I'm heavy, but I'm not like yak heavy. I'm like COVID heavy. But I watched the yaks. It's true. I watched the yaks go, and I'm like, all right, my rational brain says this bridge is not going to fall down, but my crazy brain says you're going to be flung over the side. Yeah. And people could make fun of that. And I think when people come to you with things that they're afraid of, it's always important to recognize that fear may be just written in, hard-coded, and part of who they are. And it's normal. It's okay. We all have things that we're afraid of. And again, this gets to leading with compassion and hearing people's fears, and then finding the thing that's going to help lead them across that bridge or across that gap.
Yeah, beautiful analogy. And we've already hit my goal of having Sherpa and Yak both mentioned. So that's great. But, speaking of backpacks, there was this moment on your ascent when you thought about giving up. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So, the trip was incredible. The probably the most interesting thing, is how long it takes for your body to acclimate to being at altitude. Really, once you get past, 12, 13,000 feet, and for some people even lower than that, that altitude can be really, really challenging. Altitude sickness is not predictable. You can be in the best shape in the world and be struck by altitude sickness at lower altitudes, and you can be in mediocre shape and just not be bothered by it at all. But it's really remarkable as a physician experiencing it, to have a pulse oximeter reading in this high 70s or low 80s. Like, that's something that I associate with people who are in the intensive care unit getting supplemental oxygen or needing to be intubated. So I've never been in a situation where physiologically I've been tested like that, where your mind is fuzzy because you're not getting all the oxygen that you need. It's hard to sleep. Your other body systems, for me, my digestive system was not working properly. You're hungry. Your body needs nutrition, but your intestines are just not really interested in shunting blood, or your body's not interested in shunting blood towards your digestive tract. And it's cold. When you get up there at nights, it's ridiculously cold. And so, managed to get through all of that. And then the very last day, second to last day, was the day that we got to actually Everest Base Camp, which was at 17,500 feet or so. And it was great. It was wonderful. And we all celebrated. And a number of us actually trekked even farther, right to the base of the Khumbu Icefall, which is the place to Camp 1 from Base Camp. So we did a little bit of an extra climb, and then we came back. And then the final day, the goal was to get up at about 3 o'clock in the morning and go and climb to a smaller peak at 18,500 feet called Kalapatar early in the morning to watch the sunrise over Mount Everest. And there were some people who they were done at that point. They were not going to make that climb, and I was really determined to do it. And there were about 10 of us who were going to do it. There were a number of people who had gotten sick at that point and couldn't. And so we set out at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I remember waking up freezing cold, and after managing to stay relatively okay for most of that trip, that was the night that my intestines decided to, bring everything to a grinding halt. They were not happy at all. And so that was a very long night. And I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I have to decide, all right, am I going to try this or not? And I, of course, wanted to. So we put on our headlamps and we go trekking in the dark. So now you're climbing, and it's very, very cold and it is very, very dark. And you can't tell where you are. So you don't know how long it's going to take. And, it's at the end of this 3-week trip, so you're very tired. So we were not particularly quick, but we, eventually got, pretty close. And at about 100 feet or 150 feet from the summit, the rest of me just decided that was enough. Like my legs and my lungs and my heart were not interested in going any farther. Wow. And to some extent, my brain was not particularly interested in going any farther because I was sitting there. And there was a Sherpa who had sort of stayed with me, and I was sitting there on this rock, and I was having a conversation with myself. And the conversation was essentially that this is fine. Like, the view from here is probably not much different than the view from 100 feet or 150 feet higher. And, if I tell people that I went to 18,350 feet, they would all be surprised that I even made it that far, and that if I didn't go to the very top of Kalapatar, who would know, right? Like, unless I tell them, like, who would know? And so I'm sitting there trying to catch my breath and trying to rationalize that this was good enough. But then I realized that there would be somebody who would know, right? I'd know. Yeah. And I just was not satisfied with that. I just was not willing, after all of this work, to pull up, 150 feet short. And so I ended up doing something that actually made all the difference in the world, which is, I'm got this day pack on with all the stuff that I need, in case of something goes wrong, and extra gear and all your water and food and so on and so forth. And I realized that I don't need to carry the backpack up the rest of the way. I just, as long as I get there, the backpack can stay. So I just took off my backpack and I left it on a rock, and I started to climb again. And, and I got there. I was crawling up those rocks for the last 25 feet, but I got there. And what I realized was, sometimes you hit a wall, which is fine, right? But if you take a minute and examine sort of the situation you're in, you find out that what's holding you back is actually something that you're in control of. It's extra weight that you may be carrying. And if you think about it and you're a little bit creative, you realize, I can let that go. I don't have to throw it away. I'm just going to put it down temporarily to get to the place that I need to be. And I'm so glad that I did it, because I can actually say I went as high as I was supposed to go. I went as far as I was supposed to go, and as far as I possibly could on that trip. And it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling. What was a little less satisfying is that by the time I finally got my butt in gear and my brain in gear to get up there, it was time to turn around and go back. But I got to stand at that point, and more importantly, when I came home, I had not a shred of regret or remorse. I gave it every last moment. So, for me, the lesson is, go as far as you can. And if you're not quite where you need to be, and you think that there's something holding you back, have a look at yourself, because sometimes that extra weight is actually under your control. You can set it down. You can let it go.
Thank you so much for telling us that story. It chokes me up every time. I mean, it's just so analogous to life. And, Mount Everest is analogous with all this insurmountable obstacles that anyone may be facing. And how has trekking the literal Mount Everest better prepared you to lead and climb those figurative Mount Everests?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I think about the trip, the moments on that trip that I remember the clearest are not the parts at the very tippity top. They're not. There were just times where all I was doing was focusing on one foot in front of the other. Or you're climbing and you have to be really thoughtful about where you put your next footstep, because you twist an ankle or break an ankle and you're 12,000 feet. That could be the end of your trip. So you have to actually really be focused, not just to make sure that you have nice steady breathing so that you're not burning yourself out. You're thinking about your body temperature. You're thinking about fluid intake. You don't want to be too hot. You don't want to be too cold. You don't want to go too fast. So it's finding the right pace. It's one foot in front of the other. It's finding a rhythm and clearing your mind and paying attention to what you're doing. And then along the way, stopping to look around and see where you are and the extraordinary things that you get to witness, the changes over time as you go from sort of forest and rainforest to scrub brush to no living creatures at all, no trees, no plants or anything like that. It's subtle, but you stop from time to time and you see these extraordinary things. And, for us in drug development or in biotech, making a new medicine or building a company or being part of a team that's trying to do something extraordinarily hard is highly analogous. You could sprint and make a misstep and the whole thing falls down. You could be so laser focused that you fail to look around and see the extraordinary things that are around you, and you may actually miss something that's important or memorable. Or something that you need to take with you, and having the ability to clear your head, to stay focused, to think about where you're going to place that next step, I think is important for what we do. We're always under a lot of time pressure, so coming up with the discipline to say, all right, I need to focus and I need to take care of myself to get from point A to point B on time. I think is an important skill, not only for individuals in this industry, but for teams and companies as well. We're playing a long game here, and we're trying to do something very hard where there is a real risk of falling down and not being able to get back up again. So that balance of taking care of yourself, taking care of your team, planting your steps in the right place, stopping to look around, to look for things that are remarkable or amazing, but also to appreciate, the beauty and miracle of what it is that's around you. And I don't think we do that enough sometimes in biotech, to really stop and appreciate the wonder of, the complex science that we get to wield and live our lives in the benefit of helping other people. It is extraordinary, and I do love at day one being able to stop and look around and go, wow, look at these people who are here with me. They're great people. Or look at this data. This is really exciting data. Or look at that next disease, that next mountain that I want to tackle. That looks really amazing too. Let me finish this mountain and I'll get to that mountain.
Yeah. I must say, I mean, just anybody listening is going to be like, wow, what a well-rounded, thoughtful person Sam Blackman is. And, what I didn't know was that you do a lot of storytelling on YouTube on this platform called Moth. And I watch some of these. They're incredibly moving and powerful. And I have to admit, I watched 4 of them and I cried 4 times. How has storytelling on this platform been a productive outlet for you?
Yeah, so, the Moth is actually, it's an organization started in Brooklyn probably 25 years or so ago. Okay. The reason they called it the Moth is because they, the people come like a moth to the flame for a good story. That's where the name derives from.
I wonder.
It's a competitive storytelling forum. There are live events. There's radio shows. You can listen to it on NPR. But I'd heard the show on NPR, and then my wife actually took me out on a date night to one of the live events, and they're open mic events. So there's a theme, and if you want to tell a story, you throw your name in the hat. And so the first time we went, at the door there, they said, do you want to tell a story? You want to try and tell a story? And my wife was like, absolutely not. And I was like, absolutely yes. So I threw my name in the hat. And my wife says, have you prepared something? And I go, no. And she goes, well, how will you know what to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll get up and I'll tell a story. I'll wing it. And I ended up, my name got picked and I told the story. And I loved it. I loved the idea of being able to take something from my life. In this story happened to be something from when I was an oncology fellow, and compress it into a story, and then put it out there, and then see how people reacted to it. And I say over and over again that one of the miracles of being a human being is I can push air out of my mouth, and then people feel things. If you do it right, they feel things. And that is incredible. So I started just doing this more and more. And the reasons that I do it are a couple. One is to just process some of the things that happened to me as a human being, things that happened to me when I was taking care of patients, or things that happened to me from my personal life. Telling a story, writing it, and sort of expressing it, externalizing it, for me is very therapeutic. It helps me. If I can talk about it to other people, then I feel like it's an issue or something in my life that I've now dealt with, and I'm in control of it. It's not just festering away inside of me. But what I've also found is that, particularly for the work that we do, being able to craft a story that draws people in, and they're hanging on your words to find out what happens next, it takes them somewhere. It's got humor or things buried in it so that they're thinking about it afterwards. That is a skill that is very important in a lot of different dimensions for what we do, in terms of leading people, in terms of getting investors to understand what it is that you're trying to do and be excited by what you're trying to do, being able to communicate to the external world about the mission of your team or your company or of our industry, being able to craft a story to make people feel things and think things is a really, really critical skill. So now it's become a huge part of my professional life. I do storytelling workshops for people in biotech, and when I get a chance, I love to sit down and write, and on the occasional chance, I have to do a story on stage. And there are some other groups, the Northwest Narrative Medicine Collaborative and Story Collider and Ignite Seattle, that I've gotten involved in doing storytelling with it. So it's also fun. I really just genuinely love doing it.
I find the same thing's important in recruiting. When I'm talking to a candidate, painting the picture of not just tell them here's all the stuff about the job, but painting the picture of where the story can end and them getting what they want out of it is really impactful. So storytelling is huge, and you are really good at it. I can tell you, you drew me in, and I think everyone listening to this podcast is going to feel the same way about your trek to Mount Everest. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. We try to keep it to 30 minutes, but I got to say, I've gained so much, and I could see this whole trip making into a leadership book. You should really think about doing that.
Well, I hope one day to have the time and space to do that. But here's what I would say. Luke Timmerman, who I consider to be a friend and also somebody who I admire immensely for his storytelling as a journalist, but also, what he has created in these treks that he does for biotech executives. I would highly recommend, if you're looking for something to shake up where you are in your life, consider reaching out to Luke and finding out about whatever his next trek is. I know some people are on their way to Mount Kilimanjaro with him in March, and if people are looking for an experience that's going to give them the opportunity to really reflect on who they are as a person and who they are within their industry, can't recommend Luke Timmerman's adventures there enough. And I'm sure all that information is available through his website.
Well, just on behalf of everyone in the Pharmaverse, I just want to thank you for being a guest. It's been a great episode, and so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Thanks so much.
Sam Blackman is a great follow on LinkedIn. I would encourage you to check out the Moth on YouTube. But that wraps up another episode of the Pharmaverse. We have many more great guests lined up for you, so follow the podcast so you don't miss any of them. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the Pharmaverse. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.